Hello. Oh, yeah, it is on. Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to this panel discussion on leaving nobody behind on the way to net zero. Yesterday, some of you might have been here for our financing net zero panel. This panel is going to look more at how we can ensure net zero policies, both the costs and also the opportunities, are fair and inclusive. It's going to be quite broad. I know it's quite a broad subject. We're going to try and do it in an hour. I'm going to be focusing more on energy, so from power to heat, maybe a bit of industry as well. We'll see how it goes. But it's essentially about how tackling climate change will be the driving force behind the government's levelling up agenda. With the help of our sponsor, EDF, we've got a fantastic panel, including the Energy and Clean Growth Minister, Greg Hands, who I'm sure everyone will agree has been off to a flying start in his new role. We've got the High Commissioner, George Brandis, from Australia. Alexander Stafford, MP for Rother Valley and one of the Sen Parliamentary Caucus's leading champions. Sun's political correspondent, Natasha Clark, and Rebecca Sedler, Director of Policy and Regulation at EDF. So we're going to start with some opening remarks from our speakers, starting with the Energy Minister.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Conference, and thank you to CEN. I must say I'm an enthusiastic supporter of CEN and have been ever since its establishment, and indeed its predecessor groups. I think I'm right to say I'm the only government minister to have ever resigned over an environmental issue, which of course was the expansion of Heathrow Airport back in 2018. But I'm delighted to have been asked back by Boris to join the government last February in trade and having moved to energy and climate change 3 weeks ago. And it's been an interesting time. So thank you for your saying that it's been going well so far. The energy and climate change brief, it certainly had a few issues in it in the last couple of weeks. But look, our topic today, leaving nobody behind on the way to net zero. I mean, that as you rightly point out, covers a lot of things. But let me just get the ball rolling by just saying, look, we need to have pride in this country and what we've achieved in this space already. You know, actually, and George, I know is going to speak shortly from an Australian perspective, but the UK, you know, who would have thought? I'm going to take you back 30 years, and Sam, I know, has heard this before, but I'm going to take you back to an often forgotten election in this country, the 1989 Euro elections. Which is really memorable for no reason other than it was the high watermark of the Green Party in this country. That was their best ever election result, was 1989. And they ran on a platform that you cannot take action on climate change if you're still growing the economy. They were basically a zero or negative growth party. And what has happened during my adult lifetime under successive, particularly conservative governments, is that we have proven them wrong. You know, we've actually grown the economy by 78% since that election, whilst cutting our emissions by 44%. Our emissions reduction has been greater than any other G20 country, and they continue to reduce by 2.3% last year. How have we done that? Particularly in recent years, through a big increase in renewable energy. In 2020, renewables generated 43% of our electricity, up from 11.3% in 2012. And we have also done this, I think, in a socially just way. Technology has made renewables significantly cheaper, but at the same time, we have introduced things like the energy price cap to make sure that households, that we keep a lid on their energy bills. I think on the levelling up side, massive story for us to tell. The correlation, if you like, between the locations of new technology and the locations of previous technologies, a really, really strong correlation. That is illustrated no better than my visit, one of my first, in fact, so far only. It's been difficult to get out of the office in recent weeks. But my first ministerial visit was to Blyth in the northeast. And literally, the location of one of Britain's largest and most efficient coal power plants of the past in Blyth, closed in about the year 2002, demolished in about the year 2005. Literally that same site, I was there to announce 130 million largely private sector investment in new offshore wind cabling capability. And that actually illustrates very well how the clusters of the new technology, particularly Teesside, particularly Humber, particularly the northeast of Scotland, particularly the east of England, there's big correlation there between the nuclear as well. Many of the likely and current places for nuclear. There's a big correlation, I think, between our old industry and our new industry. So where are we going further? We've announced a new round of contract for differences, announced on the 13th of September, to support up to 12 gigawatts of new renewable capacity with a draft budget of 265 million. We're moving ahead with nuclear. Hinkley Point C is being built. We will be approving the financial case for a further nuclear power plant in this Parliament. Hydrogen, the new strategy we published just last month, refer people to have a look at that. And we're going further also on offshore wind. We're not content with being #1 in the world for offshore wind. The Saudi Arabia of wind, as the Prime Minister puts it, we are going to quadruple that over the next 10 years. At every stage on the path, we've been guided by affordability and fairness. We've already allocated £800 million to decarbonising social and local authority housing. Renewable energy is getting cheaper. Solar and wind are now generally cheaper than coal in much of the world in terms of generating electricity. And we will try to incentivise the energy generation market still further with our contract for difference round coming up. All of this will be laid out later this month in more detail in our net zero strategy and a bespoke strategy on decarbonising heat and buildings coming up as well. Support for the financially excluded is a key, vital part of the government's overall approach. I've already mentioned the energy price cap, the warm home discount scheme, winter fuel payments, cold weather payments, and so on are there to protect the financially vulnerable and the excluded. In conclusion, I'd say tech and scaling up has made our energy revolution significantly more affordable. We can and will intervene to keep a lid on consumer prices. There is support available for those financially excluded. But also, don't forget, the green jobs of the future are coming particularly in areas where there's been Britain's industrial past. And that is a big reason, I think, why across the country there is a big support for our net zero agenda, particularly important as we go into COP26, where the UK will be showing global leadership in Glasgow later this month. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn next to the High Commissioner. Australia is obviously one of the UK's closest friends, but we are in different places in terms of climate action. So I was wondering if you could take us through the Australian view of how you'll go forward.
Certainly, thank you. Delighted to participate this morning. And can I begin my observations by congratulating the Johnson government on its leadership on this issue. COP26 is obviously a much anticipated and potentially world-changing event, and it is UK leadership that has brought the world to this point, or will bring the world to this point in Glasgow next month. So I think it should be acknowledged at the start by the representative of a very friendly nation that the UK's global leadership role here has been absolutely instrumental. Let me briefly explain where Australia is at in relation to net zero. And I want to make a couple of comments on what I think is the very important theme of this discussion, and that is the question of cost. Because we need always to bear in mind that the cost of transition falls on different shoulders differently, and the way in which that is dealt with as a matter of social policy matters a lot. Now, let me summarise for you the Australian government's position. As expressed by our Prime Minister Scott Morrison in January of this year, Australia is committed to achieving net zero as soon as possible, and preferably by 2050. We've chosen to express our commitment in those words because we believe that you need to show how to get there. And so we have been working across a range of areas of policy in order to ensure that Australia's commitment to net zero is deliverable as promised. And the three areas in which Australia has taken, I think, a world-leading role are in green climate finance, in renewable energy, particularly solar, and in technology-based solutions. It's important to remember that every country enters this debate from a different position. In the case of Australia, we are a very, or have historically been, a very, very carbon-dependent country. Within my lifetime, with the exception of the contribution of hydroelectricity, almost all of the Australian energy mix was sourced from coal. As well, as a result of decisions taken by Australian governments since the 1980s, which have bipartisan support, uranium or nuclear energy contributes nothing, 0%, to the Australian energy mix. And that decision was taken for ethical reasons at the time because of the view that was taken about the toxicity of nuclear waste. So when Australia enters this process of transition to net zero, we are actually being asked to make a more profound change to our economy and to our energy mix than most, so that at the end state, we are not reliant on coal while at no time being reliant on nuclear either. Australia established a goal of 28% at Paris by 2030, a 28% reduction, which is a floor, not a ceiling, in which we are meeting and beating. And when we take our NDC contributions to Glasgow, we will announce an NDC that will have the credibility of what the world will have the reassurance of knowing that it is a credible commitment, because we don't make commitments that we can't keep. In the March quarter of this year, Australia's progression towards its 2030 targets had been a 21% reduction in emissions of 2005 levels. We and the United Kingdom are among the only countries in the world which have kept and honoured their Paris commitments. The EU, for example, has not. So, as I say, when we announce our NDC in Glasgow, it will be a credible commitment. And in the meanwhile, we are developing the techniques and the technologies, particularly with renewables, to lay out a roadmap for getting to net zero, which will be published between now and the end of this month in a document to be called the Long-Term Emissions Reduction Strategy. Now, that will contain some very, very interesting material indeed, which for reasons you'll understand, I'm not going to announce today. But I think, sorry, but however, the suggestion that somehow Australia has been a climate laggard, I think, will not withstand scrutiny when the long-term emissions reduction strategy is published. Indeed, it doesn't withstand scrutiny now. Can I conclude by making just a couple of observations about the broader theme of this seminar, and that is the issue of cost. We need to recognise that the cost of the profound industrial transition that a shift to net zero stipulates will fall on different shoulders differently, both among the citizens of individual nations, and on a global scale, between nations, between the wealthier nations and the developing nations. We also need to understand that different people in our communities, in our countries, have a different level of attitude or appetite for fundamental change. By and large, if you are a financially secure, reasonably well-to-do person, you are less likely to feel threatened by change, particularly by profound change, than if you are somebody who's struggling, who's not sure where their next paycheck is coming from. And I think what that tells you is, among other things, the importance of getting the tone right in this debate. It's something that we've found in Australia, that when reasonably well-to-do people start dictating an agenda which, to those who are less empowered, particularly less financially empowered, sounds threatening, if not fearful, then they strike the wrong tone. So, whereas at the abstract level, almost everybody will say getting to net zero is a good thing, saving the world from dangerous climate change is, of course, a good public policy objective. The way in which that is given effect to in domestic policy, and the way and the manner in which it is explained to the most vulnerable citizens, matters a lot, both because we need to bring everyone with us and because the success of the government in prosecuting its policy will depend, especially, by the way, in red wool seats or blue wool seats, on how carefully and sensitively those messages are conveyed. I might stop there, but I'd be very interested to hear the discussion on that last point in particular develop. It's been an experience in my country that we haven't always got the tone right in this debate. And I think getting the tone right is almost as important as getting the policy substance right.
Thank you very much. I think that's very much the nub of the event, and I think that's where we're going to be getting on some really good discussion. And our next speaker, Alexander Stafford, I know, loves to point out the opportunities as well as the costs of net zero and in his constituency of Royal Valley. Just before you start, Alexander, I might point out on your way out, we have an essay collection which features an essay from Alexander on this issue. I'd advise everyone to...
Signed copies available.
Yeah. Take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you very much indeed for having me. I'm sorry for the hoarse voice. Had a bit of fun last night. But it was a really good speech you just gave, George, and actually set me up very nicely as an MP for a red wall seat, a seat that's never been held by the Conservatives, a seat that had 6 former coal mines in. To me, this topic is vital, absolutely vital, and getting the tone right is what matters. Because seats like mine, which have been calls of left behind, red wall, whatever you want to call them, frankly, need help. We need more jobs. We need more investments. And I very much see the government keeps talking about building back better and greening back better and all that. That is a great opportunity to revitalise local economies in seats like mine. I see that the whole world is going net zero. Some countries faster, some countries slower, but we're all going in the same direction, whether it's China, India, Australia, the UK. If we in the UK get there first and farthest when it comes to providing the solutions to getting to net zero, whether it's technology solutions such as hydrogen, such as aviation, or whether it's the financial solutions, we can then, frankly, make money. We are Conservatives. We're here to make money and have good business and help the world as well. And I very much see the green agenda, which is an awful phrase for it, is the way we can do it. Because I want to see more industries develop in seats like mine in Rother Valley, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's processing of critical minerals, to revitalise that. So when people talk about leaving people behind and cost of living and taxation from this, that worries me, because that is not what we should be talking about. Frankly, I don't think we should be talking about carbon at all. I think we should be talking about the whole world is going one way, the whole world needs new technology, new futures. We in the UK can have this new industrial revolution to provide that. And those new jobs can be invested in seats like mine. My seats are a highly skilled workforce, manufacturing workforce. We can reskill people. And it's very important that we get there. So the tone is incredibly important, and we need to present it as the opportunities. And we're also very blessed in the UK. We have some big natural advantages. We've already lost the race when it comes to some technology. We've got to be serious about that. Eventually, everyone will be driving an electric vehicle, a passenger electric vehicle. However, 73% of all lithium-ion batteries are made in China. Fundamentally, the UK is not making much money out of that. We have lost that race already. It's good for the environment, but not necessarily good for the UK PLC. However, there's a lot of other technologies which are still nascent and still being developed, which the UK does have natural advantages on. One I talk about is hydrogen. We cannot put an all battery in an HGV or a plane or a boat. We probably won't for 50 plus years. However, we do need to decarbonise heavy transport. And the only solution which anyone really can see, really, is hydrogen, for instance. And we in the UK have a natural advantage. Already a third of all hydrogen engines have components built in the United Kingdom. We already have that. If we upscale that, and if the UK government and industry heavily invests in these nascent technologies, we can actually be a world leader on that. Whether it's offshore wind, we have a natural advantage already. Whether it's SMR for nuclear, we have already the technology and the skill set as well. So when we go back and I talk to my constituents, I never talk about carbon, I never talk about climate change, but I talk about the new possibility of jobs, money, and wealth. And I do fear quite a lot of people who are environmentalists here. I include myself, I work for WWF, that we talk to the wrong people about the wrong things. We should stop talking about carbon. We should stop talking about green. We should just talk about jobs and the future and say, we actually have a plan. We talk about building that better, and this is how we're going to do it. This is the jobs we're going to have in the next 5-10 years. And that way we can bring people with us. But we've also got to be slightly realistic. Some jobs will change. Some jobs we're doing now will no longer be viable. But it doesn't mean that people will be left behind or lose out. As long as we upskill technology, upskill people working, we can provide jobs. For instance, heat pumps are going to be quite prevalent in quite a lot of homes. We've already got quite a large boiler sector, manufacturing plumbing sector. We just need to make sure the plumbers of the future know how to fit heat pumps. So I don't see it as a worry at all. As long as we get it right, as long as we stop talking about carbon and start talking about just new technologies, because I think it's a very prosperous future for all.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pick up on the heat pumps and boilers argument, because Natasha, I know that you've been covering a lot of the debate that's been happening over the summer, and then with heat pumps and gas boilers, a lot of speculation in the media about what the government policy is going to be, and then, of course, recently with the gas price surge, we've been sort of wondering how do we protect consumers in the long term from the volatile fossil fuels. So yeah, if we could hear from you from that.
Can you hear me? Thanks so much for having me on this panel. It's really good to talk to you all about something that I think is quite important to The Sun and its readership, about net zero and about climate change. It's something that we've, as a paper, not traditionally given a huge amount of coverage to. I think that's probably fair to say. I'm really excited to be taking on the beat. I really enjoy it. It's something that does personally really interest me, so I'm very glad to be speaking to you guys today. And I think it's actually absolutely central to the work we're doing at The Sun is to think about how net zero can be fair. And I think that fairness is a good word for it. Because if it's not fair and our readers don't think that it is fair, they will not support it and they will not get behind this idea. And I just think it's very important to talk honestly about it. It's fab to talk about the opportunities, but I think government need to do better at sort of explaining exactly what net zero means. I think that's a risk that many government departments fall into is talking a lot in sort of jargony terms about NDCs and all these acronyms that nobody really understands. It's been fab taking on this role, but yes, I do think some of the green lobby do like to sort of look down on the way that we talk to our readers and look down on the Sun in the way that we're trying to explain this to our readers, and I completely reject that we should be doing that. We need to be talking to them honestly. We need to be talking to them in language they understand. In order for everybody to get on board with this, we need to be taking people with us, like some of the other panel have said. We're all going on a journey on this together, and nobody needs to be left behind in that. So where are we now? I think the first thing that I wanted to say is it is obvious to most of us in this room that we do have to go on this journey. I think the days of climate change denial are sort of behind us now. Just look at polls, look at what what people think about climate change. They say it's much more important to them these days. It's an issue that they care about more and more. It's an issue that we know that our readers care more and more about, which is exactly why I think I'm doing this job now, which is quite exciting, because I think our readers care much more about it than they used to, which is fab. It's why we launched our Green Team campaign a couple of years ago, where it's basically just about sort of letting readers know there are things that you can do to help the planet. And instead, the debate has now changed to how. How do we do this? Obviously, Paris was all about whether we are going to do this, and now it's about the actual tricky stuff of exactly what the plan is. And I and all of our colleagues are very excited to see the net zero strategy coming up soon, the heat and building strategy, eagerly awaiting it. So yeah, that will be, I think, hopefully give us some of these answers about exactly what it looks like, because it is really difficult to sort of have this argument and have this debate if we sort of don't know what the plan is and where we're going. Net zero in 2050 feels sometimes like really far away, but actually it's not, and we need to get these plans in motion now if we're going to have any hope of meeting these legally binding targets. Yeah, coming up to COP, yeah, we're looking forward to seeing that. But yeah, so leaving nobody behind for me, for us at The Sun, has to be about better communicating these messages, better talking to people about climate change, about energy, about what it means for the consumer, and obviously, you know, what it means for your home. I think the two key areas for us are going to be heating and about transport. So how am I going to replace my boiler at some point? That's a really key issue for a lot of our readers. And what am I going to do about my car? Am I going to have to switch to an electric vehicle? Obviously, the answer is yes, at some point you probably will. And for our readers, the worry at the moment is that is a lot more in terms of cost. But yes, I think, yeah, government needs to be better about sort of explaining this to people, and not in a patronising way, but just in a way that people can understand. Yeah, I also think that government also need to be better at not scaring people, but sort of making the argument for why we need to do this now in terms of cost. It's going to cost a lot more if we don't do this now, and I think that's a very crucial message to put to people, is that actually, if you know, this will cost some money. This will cost everybody some money, but we need to do it now, because if not, it's going to cost a lot more later down the line. So yes, leaving no one behind in the net zero race means including everyone, speaking to everyone, not just pumping out green messages. You know, I think the word greenwashing. I think a lot of companies are very keen to say, look, we're doing all of this shiny net zero goals and speaking all of the right language, but what does it mean? And are you know, really engaged in it? And are you talking to your customers, to your consumers, you know, to people, ordinary people, about what this actually means for them? In terms of what government could do, I think it's quite obvious to say that the low income, you know, needs to be protected from the worst effects of this. I've been listening to a few panels from MPs over the past few days, and you know, all of the research says that red wall constituencies will be hit hardest by some of the net zero goals. We need to make sure that those people on low incomes are protected. That means grants, that means loans, that means support, that means communication, that means better education, that means talking to people in schools and universities right across. But yes, sorry Rishi, I'm afraid it might mean some money as well. But yes, luckily for the government, it is a journey that a lot of people want to go on. There was some polling at the weekend that you guys did, which was excellent, you know, showing exactly why the public are on board with it. But it does sort of give a little bit of a double-edged sword, that there is some warnings that, you know, while we will be prepared to accept some costs to go on this, and like the High Commissioner said, I think obviously when you're in a financially secure situation, it just doesn't matter to you quite as much as it will if you're on a low income. So yeah, that's I think that's all I wanted to say, really. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much. You beat me to mentioning the polling. It was very good. We definitely do have a mandate for tackling climate change now. I think climate change came second behind the NHS, so we're almost at clapping level. Rebecca, I was wondering, could we hear from you about how? I always hear that private companies are basically raring to go on net zero, perhaps even faster than the government can be. So if you could give us some thoughts on that, and maybe about skills as well, the skills gap that's needed that Alexander mentioned.
Sure. So lovely to be here today, and surprisingly agreeing with just about everything that's been said thus far on the panel. So we'll try to add and give a bit of a experience from the energy sector. I mean, most people will know EDF as a nuclear company. Perhaps some of you in the room are supplied by EDF. We also have a large renewables fleet across different technologies. We're a large battery operator. We have got a electric vehicle charging installation organisation. We have many contracts with very small renewable generators. So it's a really multifaceted energy organisation. But the purpose of our organisation, which is helping Britain achieve net zero, is what binds everyone together. And it really has been a kind of thread that's woven wherever you are, connected you, wherever you are in the organisation, whether you're talking to customers about their bills, whether you're structuring deals for renewable generators, whether you're looking at Pathfinder projects for floating offshore wind in Blythe, which is what our renewables company is currently doing. It's an incredibly strong purpose. But you know, the reality is in energy is that it is a sector full of acronyms with very complex regulation, where people can tend to complicate terms. And I think a lot of what we're talking about today needs to be, I don't know, humanised, whatever the word is, so that it is more accessible to the general public. We often talk about affordability before we talk about education, for example, and I don't mean to be patronising in an education perspective, but until, you know, the last few years, I didn't have a clue what the carbon content of my gas boiler was, you know, and I've been in the sector for 20 years. It's just, you know, talking about changing gas boilers, which most people in this country find cheap and convenient, without going through the discussion of why and, you know, what the benefit was, what the opportunities will be from there, is not the right place to start. You need to start at the education of these topics. I think levelling up, which of course is a big theme of this conference, for me comes down to communities. That's when it becomes something tangible. And when we're talking about skills and green jobs transition, if you look and see the impact where we've had success at a community level, it can be transformational for a community. So some of you may have heard of a small project that EDF is doing in Somerset called Hinkley Point C. So I'll give you some stats from that project. I think we've so far supported 800 apprentices. We have an ambition to support in excess of 1,000. I think 40 million has been invested so far into training centres of excellence, whether that be welding or other construction skills, which are needed clearly for to be supported in the UK for that particular project, but will support other infrastructure projects in years to come. You know, community is so important. If you poll a topic like nuclear, you will get very, very different views depending on whether you're part of a community where the jobs, training, local supply chain is supported by nuclear presence versus when you're talking about it at a theoretical level. And you know, that's common for quite a lot of net zero opportunities, I have to say. The themes of fairness, affordability, experience have all been discussed as well. We have to really tackle the fairness challenge associated with net zero. On one hand, we have to encourage and embrace new technologies, so electric vehicles, flexibility that we can potentially use from having heat pumps in our houses, and, you know, benefit not just through being able to lower our carbon content, but also our costs. However, if you think about that, you need to be able to afford the assets in the first place to have those benefits. And I think many of us saw in this country with the feed-in tariff scheme that was offered to people who were fortunate to be able to have solar panels on their roofs that gave them heavily subsidised tariffs at the expense of those costs being distributed to everyone else, who many of which couldn't afford the panels. So we have to just understand the long-term consequences of what we're doing and ensure that costs and opportunity are balanced in the right places. But along with that is experience. There has to be the right personal customer experience, I guess I'd articulate it. That's important, as we've seen in the energy sector, when you're having a smart meter fitted. It's important, particularly important if you're letting anyone in your home to come and do anything. So, you know, it starts to become much more sort of interventionist when you're talking about heating. And of course, you know, again, referring to the local community, you have to understand what these projects will and won't mean to the disruption or not in your local community. It has to be honest, it has to be planned and expectations managed. But there are huge opportunities presented by net zero, huge opportunities for levelling out, for providing high-skilled jobs for the future, for transforming communities, for embracing new technologies that will provide UK with competitive advantage and export opportunities. But we have to talk about it on one hand, be a bit more precise and demystify it away from these carbon and technical energy terms that we seem to be embracing too readily.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open up to questions in just a second because I know there's going to be lots. But just before we do, Minister, I was wondering, one of the key theme of the essay collection, which I mentioned earlier, do pick up a copy on the way out. Also, I've spotted another author, Laura Sands, is in the audience. But one of the key themes of the North Sea Transition essay collection is making sure that we support workers from the oil and gas sector into the new renewable sector. It might be floating offshore wind or fixed offshore wind or carbon capture and storage. Obviously, the government announced yesterday, I believe, the conference is sort of blurring into one day for me now, the new 2035 power decarbonisation target. So I was wondering if you could give a bit more detail on how we keep the pace going on the transition, which we now legally need, while also supporting the workers into new industries.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, and it's absolutely crucial. And I think we've heard from our panelists so far, particularly Alexander, Rebecca, and Natasha as well, the importance of keeping communities in particular bought into this process. And part of that, probably the most important part of that, is you're right, is not a kind of lofty theoreticals ideals, it's basic jobs. And that is going to be crucial in how we do the messaging and in terms of how we manage the sector. And looking very, very carefully, obviously we are principally a private sector economy, and we should be proud of that in this country. But with the ability for government to nudge, influence, intervene where needed. So very, very careful management of those skills bases. Fortunately, as you rightly point out, the overlap between, say, old-style oil and gas skills and new-style offshore wind skills or new-style carbon capture and storage skills, or the old-style skills in gas boiler installations and heat pump installations. You know, there is actually quite a large overlap in a lot of this. So we are kind of, I think, pushing at a bit of an open door, but we cannot assume for any moment that that transition is either can or should be either overnight, but training up, for example, those involved in gas boilers gradually on heat pumps, I think that'll be a big, big part of how we manage that transition over the next 10 years. So I say there are some things working in our favour, the natural overlap between some of those skills, but we cannot take anything for granted. It's a big, big part of the agenda for my department, also for the Department for Education on the skills side.
Thank you very much. I'll open up to questions now. Let's go for 3 at a time. I think we'll try and keep them very short, just questions. Do feel free to say who you are. So let's start with this lady from the front. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jess from Stirling. Up in Scotland, we've got the SNP, and down here you have Labour. Whenever we say we want net zero by 2050, they say, oh, well, we want net zero by 2049. So how do we sell that actually being sensible with targets is the best way, and how do we sell that actually we're being as ambitious as we can and we're taking the right approach when they're always going to try and go that little bit further?
Fantastic. Another one, that gentleman over there.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Anthony Manchester from BlackRock. We've got an ambition in the private sector to channel as more money into sustainable finances than anyone else. But I think we're clear that the private sector on its own can't deliver everything that's needed for the transition. So given what we've seen recently about public concern and anger about petrol prices and just going up a few pence, how politically can we sell the kinds of changes that are going to be needed in terms of things like carbon taxes and the costs of retrofitting homes, etc.? I mean, that strikes me as a really, really important challenge in the years ahead.
Okay, brilliant. And one more lady from the front again.
Hi, I'm Ellie from Warwickshire. I'm really glad that a lot of people have mentioned the kind of economic problem for consumers, and that this is a bit of a privilege issue in terms of you have to be privileged to be able to make those decisions and make those changes. But I also think that there is, and it is great to hear that so much like structural change is being kind of addressed. But I think there's an importance of like raising awareness for consumers and raising awareness in terms of current impact. And cutting through all this jargon and understanding what our current impact is. So in Oxford, who I work with, we're trialling like food labelling to show environmental impact on food, and all those kind of low-level activities that consumers can do, I think is really important and plays a part of this. So what is the government kind of doing in terms of that, raising awareness of on an individual level?
Fantastic, thank you very much. Natasha, I was wondering if I might come to you first, because I know that you mentioned it in your open statement. How can the government really communicate the problems?
That's the question for the government minister. How can we better communicate? Talk to us. We'd love to have more ministers making the case for net zero and climate change and talking to our readers about that. I think I'm still quite new into the job, so I'm still trying to figure out myself what the best way of talking to people is, because we don't want to be patronising about it. We want to talk to them in a language they can understand. We don't want to scare them. We want them to be interested. It's really tricky. It's a really difficult question, and I don't think I've got the answer for you, I'm afraid. But yeah, I just think more conversations about it, and listening to people. I'm not saying we need to have one big climate assembly and have everybody in the room, but I think just more communication, but also just be honest about it. It still feels like, despite the fact we're a month away from COP, it doesn't feel like, I thought that this Carty conference would be much more focused on net zero and COP and green, and it doesn't feel like it is. And obviously we have had maybe the energy crisis and petrol and all of that stuff to deal with, and maybe that's sort of taken a slight shine off it. But I did feel that we would be more talking about this right now, and the Prime Minister keeps saying that this is his priority, but it doesn't feel like it is. And I think, Boris needs to lead from the top on this one. I think him and, I think also Carrie, I think, was obviously clearly very, very interested in this issue. And as a young woman, I think she should be hopefully out there talking about it a little bit more. I think that'd be a really good way for her to engage people. I think what the government are doing on COP is exciting and interesting, and engaging people like Ellie Goulding to be a COP ambassador, things like that. Talking to people who, I think our readership will want to talk to and want to listen to, using ambassadors and using messages that they understand. I think everybody would benefit from that. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear your views, Greg, on what you think.
Well, thank you, thank you, Natasha. And look, can I just take on this idea that Boris Johnson isn't sufficiently focused? I think this is like his biggest focus, probably after the recovery from the pandemic, I think, is on net zero and COP. I think the passion that he put in his speech in New York to the UN General Assembly, the passion I'm sure we will see tomorrow in his speech to conference. I think actually Boris absolutely committed. I think he's actually been part of the Conservative Party shift on these issues. I've known Boris a long time when he was Mayor of London as a London MP, and I think he's been a big part in the Conservative Party shift on environmental issues that we've seen really over the last 15 years. It's absolutely at home with the vote blue, go green messaging of the late noughties and so on. So, and I'm slightly surprised that this is my 9th fringe on net zero, climate change and energy. And actually, I think the level of interest in this conference in these topics has actually been huge. But to be honest, we haven't had a conference for 2 years, so I can't easily remember what the level of interest was at the last one. But I think actually the level of interest has been extremely strong. I think just to pick up a few of the other points, the SNP. I love taking on the SNP at the dispatch box. It's one of my great, I always say Labour is business, but SNP is pleasure when it comes to the dispatch box. Because normally they construct like a pack of cards for their policy, and you just remove one small card and the whole thing comes collapsing down. I would say, look at the, let's see how the coalition with the Greens goes, because don't forget, I don't think the Scottish Green Party is that different to the English Green Party in this regard. And I think a lot of their, the only way to meet our climate change obligations is to close stuff down, close down large parts of the economy. I say we should watch that really, really closely. I've got our people at Bays, our political people at Bays, to keep a really close eye on what is the Scottish Government actually doing in this space. And we have to challenge them. We have to challenge on who is actually delivering in this space. It's almost always the UK government that is delivering in this area. That's one of the reasons why our emissions have gone down so much. Actually, a large part of that success is within Scotland, driven by the UK government. I think BlackRock, great. It's great to have BlackRock here at the fringe, looking at investing in the sector. And we do need to bring in private sector investment. I mentioned my visit to Blythe last week, and the new offshore wind cabling factory there, JDR Cables. There's a little bit of government money in that, but essentially that is private sector money, the £130 million scheme. There's a bit of government money out of the £160 million offshore wind fund, but I would say a fraction of that total investment. So bringing investment in, either from companies themselves or from investors like yourselves, working out ways to find it more attractive. I think the green gilt, and I'm not suggesting that BlackRock is you probably are a big gilt investor actually, but I'm not suggesting for BlackRock that would be necessarily the most kind of immediate way. But I think sending a message, one of the reasons for doing the green gilt is that the government can send the message across the whole sector. Having spent a long time in the government bond markets in the past, governments are good in those markets, sending a message that green investment, the government itself, green gilt, that is what the message there. So bringing more people in like yourselves. I think the question from Warwickshire about the awareness at an individual level, absolutely right. And that is why I think the comments made so far about focusing on jobs, economic development. After all, that is why a lot of people in left-behind communities, when previous transitions, when this led to a loss of jobs, was one of the reasons, if you like, that they fell out of love with policy making. So we need what key part of bringing them back into loving what we are doing as a country is offering jobs, new high-tech green jobs. I think it's a vital part of that.
Can I just pick up one of the points made about having more conversations? I'm going to take a slightly counterintuitive approach and say, actually, maybe we should have fewer conversations about climate change, because I think that does scare the horses a bit. When we start talking often to the public about, NDCs and net zero, people get a bit concerned. Because fundamentally, your life, my life, in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, will be the same. You'll get in a car to go to work. It'll be an electric car, but you'll still get in a car. When you get home, you'll turn on a switch in your house and it'll get hotter. Yes, there will be a gas boiler, but it'll be a heat pump or hydrogen. So fundamentally, a lot of people's lives won't actually change. And sometimes we make this going green as this big issue, massive conferences. We all need to get discussing it. Most people don't think too much about carbon. They don't look at politics. They just want to get on with their lives. And in fact, we should be doing more sort of saying electric car, not about the environment, but because it's the next bit of tech. I mean, we've all got mobile phones in our pockets. 10 years ago, none of them were smart. 20 years ago, no one had a mobile phone. We didn't have a big sort of government campaign saying, like, the future is going to be a smartphone and it's going to change your world and this is what's going to happen. People just, well, it's a better bit of tech. But it's the natural progress. People understand things change, things move forward. We're not going to have this massive sea change. We're not like the Greens in Scotland say, we're going to live in a cave. We'll just do things, but better. So actually, maybe we shouldn't be talking about it in such a way and just say, we're just lives getting on. We could talk about how we may tax things, but that's for politicians, us around the room to discuss. They probably don't understand when we move tariffs on here, on tax on there. That's not what they care about. They care about living their lives. And all these green technologies, green solutions allow us to live our lives better, in every way better, cleaner, smarter, whatever, digital. People like that. We just need to maybe relax a bit more because we are getting there. I'm getting there quickly. Controversial, I know. But.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much. Any of the other two speakers like to come in on that? Any other questions? Okay, we'll open the floor again, sorry. So I saw two hands go up at the back, waving man, and the gentleman next to him.
Thank you. Shenke from CPF, Ocean and Sail West. In our recent discussion, many local members are really caring about the price. People do understand the individual costs, such as heat pump, EV, electric vehicles, etc., who will benefit these technology, who will pay the fee. That's fine. But they are more questioning about the large infrastructure project. Particularly the last few weeks, we keep receiving the messages from BBC, IFT, Daily Telegraph saying EDF potentially will lose your partner on the nuclear new build project. We all know that is very, very expensive project, £20 billion for the new build. That's not including the decommissioning cost and also nuclear waste cost. So what does it mean if EDF lose your partner? Does it mean we taxpayers are going to pay the gap or something else?
May I just come straight to Rebecca for that one? Thanks.
So I think I'd lose all credibility if I was to sit here and try and say that nuclear power isn't expensive and isn't a big cost. It's a big infrastructure project. It's a huge scale energy project. What I think, taking a step back and understanding what nuclear power does, it's part of the UK power system, and what we have to have is a diverse power system. That's for two reasons. Firstly is for security of supply, and I think that we're getting a little taste of what a volatile energy system could bring to the UK over the last weeks, but also for it to be affordable. So if you have to have, if you change one technology in that system, all kinds of other things change at the same time. It's a connected system requiring networks, connections, different types of technology to produce power at different times in the day. So it's impossible to say, right, okay, we're just going to choose one type of technology and the cheapest. If you try and match the whole demand of the UK to that, you will end up paying more. It's pretty proven, and in any credible modelling that's been produced by government, the CCC, by National Grid, that nuclear is an essential part of the mix, and then we need more UK nuclear capacity to have an affordable net zero power system. I think there's potential technology that's being developed at the moment that could change the mix in years to come, but it's certainly not available right now on any affordable level or at scale. So if we think about the decisions we need to make to decarbonise the system and, as I say, provide security of supply, for me, the strategic case for nuclear is absolutely clear. I'd be very interested in having a discussion with the gentleman about what the cost of a system is going to look like in years to come without nuclear in it, but I suspect the amount of capacity you're going to have to build of cheap technology in isolation would make it far less affordable than with nuclear in it.
Brilliant, thanks. I was wondering if I might come to the two government representatives on this, starting with the High Commissioner, about infrastructure costs and making sure that they don't fall too heavily on the consumer.
Well, I think that inevitably there will be a cost and will be amortised over years, because depending on the size of the infrastructure. But the approach that we've taken in Australia, of course, is to invest heavily and encourage the private sector. And our major contribution to technology-based solutions, not the only one, but in terms of scale, it's far and away the biggest, is solar energy. And Boris talks about Britain being the Saudi Arabia of wind. Well, Australia is kind of the Australia of sun. It's we've got so much sun and so much vacant land. So we are, for example, as an Australian company called Sun Cable has just announced what is by far the most ambitious solar energy program in the world, whereby an array of solar panels in the northern part of the Northern Territory will shortly be providing 1/3 of the electricity into the grid of Singapore through a long undersea cable. So, you know, the persuading private enterprise, and this is happening inevitably because, you know, the market is moving to renewables. Renewables are now less costly in Australia than carbon-based energy generation. So the absorption of the infrastructure cost by private enterprise and the lowering of the unit cost as it scales up is, I think, the simple answer to the proposition you're mentioning.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Look, I would agree with the premise, but if you had to characterise our energy policy in 3 words, it would be diversity, security and affordability. Renewables achieve all 3. Nuclear is expensive. Hinkley Point C, I worked on the finances of Hinkley Point C back in 2015, 2016. But the more you use first technology and then scaling up, and one of the great successes of offshore wind has been, yes, we had the technology right, but also we invested in the scaling up. And the scaling up is what really reduces the price. It reduces both the manufacturing price, enables you to build a bigger homegrown supply chain. Nuclear, we have the commitment to have a second plant brought to a financial case this Parliament. If you can build further nuclear plants, then that will reduce the unit cost. That is, if you like, what the lesson of major energy investments is and will continue to be. The technology, but then the scaling up, reducing the price, making it more affordable all round. And it does lead into our diversity and security questions as well. The more we are able to have nuclear as part of the mix, along with our offshore wind, along with our solar, along with our hydrogen, then that is going to be a key part of Britain's energy future.
Brilliant, thanks. I think there's one more question with the gentleman at the back, and then we'll move on to some closing statements, just very brief, because I know Alexander needs to go off to another panel.
Yeah, thank you. Mike Leonard from the Building Alliance. You mentioned that we've already lost 2 races, that for batteries and for solar panels. Are we going to lose the 3rd? Are we going to lose heat pumps? You know, boilers currently made in the UK, 90% of boilers are made by British manufacturers, and yet the future is they're going to import heat pumps from abroad unless government gives a little bit of that money, Minister, to incentivise those companies to do it. And thirdly, you know, is there a case for a systemic, huge investment in hydrogen as well at this point in time? You know, I see us playing around with that, doing lots of trials, that sort of stuff, but you know, some nuclear-style investment in hydrogen, because it's not all about heat pumps.
Thank you very much. Who would like to start out first?
I'll just start by saying yes, the hydrogen, we should massively invest in hydrogen. We cannot decarbonise heavy-duty vehicles, we cannot decarbonise planes. Heat pumps are great, but there's 30 million homes. We're currently replacing between 1 and 1.5 million boilers a year. We won't be able to get heat pumps up scale to make a massive difference. We should go hard on hydrogen. We have natural advantages, and then we can export the technology and skill sets abroad and make lots of money from it.
Thank you. Natasha, would you like some closing remarks?
Yeah, no, I just, on the sort of heat pump hydrogen thing, I think, yeah, obviously government have sort of signalled that there's lots of different areas that we can go, and I think, you know, there's not one size fits all solution like boilers, you know, in homes. It's not going to be quite the same. So I think it would be good to continue to divest and continue to, you know, keep the options open, I think, for heat pumps, for hydrogen, for, there's even more solutions, I think, for things like flats, I think, that don't even, it can't do heat pumps and various other sort of new technologies. Yes, absolutely, we shouldn't be losing any more races. We definitely need to be thinking about getting ahead of this now. Retraining gas engineers to be installing heat pumps is something that we mentioned earlier. But yes, keeping the options open, but also it keeps the options open for the consumer as well. So when they come to making their choice about how they're going to replace their own boiler, we need to be basically saying to them, you can have this one, this one, this one, on this one. Here's the pros and cons of all of these ones. Here's how they work. Here's what might be best for you, rather than just saying you have to install a heat pump and you have to do it by this date.
I'm just going to, conscious of time, we published a very comprehensive hydrogen strategy just in August, and we've got a heat and building strategy coming up later this year. That will lay out immense, I hope, a lot of detail on both those questions for you, sir.
Two observations. First of all, I think we're way beyond the weather question about net zero, and the focus of the debate ought to be on the how question. The price of credible entry into this debate should be not merely to say we're getting to net zero by such and such a year, but to be able to say how we're going to do it. And unless you can demonstrate a roadmap to get there, then it's just words. The United Kingdom has such a roadmap. A lot of other countries don't. Australia does, but a lot of other countries don't. Second point to always remember as well, as I said this at the start, every country is different. Every country comes to this debate from a different starting point. So a one-size-fits-all model is not the right model for anyone.
And Rebecca, closing statement.
I was just reflecting, we've not talked about energy efficiency at all. Again, it's really interesting how we skip forward 2 or 3 steps before talking about something that's much more tangible and relatable to most people in the country and incredibly important. I think there's so many opportunities on the heat side. And many of the policy proposals that were announced in the Energy White Paper around, having minimum standards on energy efficiency, the potential rebalancing of policy costs between electricity and gas. Whilst that doesn't mean anything to normal people, it makes a huge difference in the economics of what heating solution you're going to choose. There's a huge amount to be done, though, on the customer experience. I don't know whether anyone has recently had any work done in their house or phoned up anyone about a heat pump or got different quotes. I can tell you at the moment the quality of that experience for a potential consumer is really not where it should be. So I think there's a huge amount that investment can achieve. And I think that by spurring forward and supporting the 10-point plan targets of 600,000 heat pumps a year with investment, with grants, with potentially expanding the ECO scheme, the energy company obligation scheme, to provide levers that customers in lower earning deciles can take advantage first of accessing energy efficiency or low carbon heating services would really, really spur much needed growth.
Brilliant, thank you. Conscious, I've already overrun, so thank you very much to all the speakers. You've all been fantastic, and to our sponsors as well. Thank you very much.